see us?
Yep, he sees us. Go ahead and unmute.
This one? Mrs. Jalal, can you hear us?
Well, yes, I can.
Okay,
Okay,
good.
thank you.
This is Beth.
Okay, good morning. Thank you for attending the meeting this morning for policy. We have 3 policies on the agenda for today, and we will start with policy 610, purchases subject to bid. And Mrs. Hobbs, I'll send that over to you.
Yes, this is an annual policy that we bring forward with the thresholds changing for bids, quotes. Now, we did update it a little bit to take out the chart that was in there showing the bid threshold, and we put in the link, so it will link to what the yearly updates are. So that way we would not have to bring it back each year to be updated, just that link will always be updated. So that is just the major change.
Okay, do any of you have any questions about this? No? Where is that easy button?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, then I guess we can move that forward to first read.
Okay.
Okay. All right, the next one is policy 706.1, disposal of surplus property, obsolete equipment, and real estate. This is a new policy, and I guess either Mr. Albin or Mrs. Hobbs can address it.
Yes, the reason for this policy obviously was that we just did not have anything defined as some procedures and guidelines for surplus. PSBA does not have a template for this. We reached out. This is what they consider an LEA generated policy, but other school districts do have this policy in place. So researched a bunch of local districts as well as some other ones in the state I typically go to that do policy, in my opinion, well. So, and pulled together this template here that we can look at, review, make changes to as it applies to our district. Again, it has all the purpose authority. We did add a definition for property to make it more clear what we're talking about. And then the delegation of responsibility starts at the business operations level, then goes to the superintendent, and then the board. So it's kind of a progression there. We have the guidelines are listed there. The various disposal methods, they're listed in no particular order. They're just options. So any of those can be utilized for disposal. There's a piece in here about real estate that was recently added in some of the more recent policies that districts have put in place for this particular 706.1. And then the hold harmless agreement, that's I guess some legalese at the end of this that looks like is in those policies. So I don't know if do we want to go section by section? Or does anyone have any immediate thoughts?
I remember a couple of months ago, there was a report made to us regarding surplus items that included archery equipment, which I found to be very interesting because I'm an archer, and so I was wondering if within our policy, if there is a way that we could make that equipment available to other nonprofits, in a sense. For example, the Game Commission probably teaches archery to students. You know, perhaps as part of their hunter education program.
Okay.
You know, that's sort of. In other words, I'd like if there's any value at all to anyone, I would prefer that rather than putting it in the dumpster.
Sure. And I think there's some leeway here in the disposal methods to do exactly that.
Yeah, I
So-
think in those 9 that are listed, there's I mean, it's a great question. The 9 that are listed gives you the flexibility to do that. And we lead the administration in saying, hey, if there's value, we obviously don't just throw it in the dumpster then. Does it go to a sealed bid? Does it go to somebody else? Anybody on that list? And in my brief time here, a couple people have said, well, what do we do with these things? And then that's when I started talking to Joe. I was like, do we have a policy on this and we didn't? So these are just 9 methods that are there. If something comes up in the future and you want to add methods of how to do that or whatever, that's fine too. We try to make them broad enough that they'll fit everything, bows to books, you know, so to speak. And as part of what you're talking about is one of those, is within those methods. The selection of those methods, you would basically be placing on the administrator in charge of that group, which they themselves are going to be the most strong advocates for whatever it is that's going by. So if they would see value, then they're going to obviously look at us and say, well, there's value. Could we do this, this, or this? Now they can say, this fits in one of those 9,
Right.
rather than coming and saying, how do we do this? What do we do? This sets a good tone.
Yes, right, thank you.
If you look at item 8, it says, these items may be donated to charitable nonprofit organizations or otherwise discarded. So I think that would cover what you're asking.
Absolutely.
And is this based on like a first come, first serve? If there's an item that's up there and somebody speaks out and says, I want to buy it, or I would like to take it off your hands, is that the way it would work?
Pretty much for the most part, that's what we would do.
Okay.
Because we do not want to get into spending money and advertising
Right,
that this is out
absolutely,
there,
yeah.
type thing. So, yeah, it would be that. We would certainly be hopeful, and obviously as a school district, a public school district, this has to be shown what we're getting rid of and that type of thing. We will do the best we can administratively to make sure everybody's aware.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Then I would like to move this to first read. Okay. Almost as easy. Okay. The other thing I do want to mention, at the last meeting, we were discussing policy 802, which dealt with school organization. And the administrative chain of command, I guess, the chart which
Organizational
shows the
chart, yeah.
organizational chart needs to be reworked. So I know Mrs. Jalal had asked for a definition about the word set. And since the organizational chart won't be ready, that accompanies that policy till next month, we'll put that on the agenda for next month. Which moves us to policy 006. Okay, 006 refers to meetings. We had a brief discussion about that at the December meeting. And there were some questions, and at this point, I'm actually going to just turn this over to Dr. Bell to let him field the questions.
Yes, Joe and I'll field what, because he has a little bit more of a background than I do. But if anybody has questions in relationship to what's proposed there, I think that now would be the time to have those discussions.
Okay, go back to, I guess, the questions that were in the minutes.
Is that what we want to do?
I
Yep,
don't know.
I have them
Go
here.
ahead,
If we
yeah.
want to do it, Monday.
You wanna
then
do
we'll-
Yep,
that?
nobody has any other questions
Okay.
to start, so let's go back, Joe.
Okay. All right, at the December meeting, Mrs. Jalal and, looks like Mr. Lustig had a variety of points they wanted for clarification, so these are in the minutes, so we can just go through them one by one.
Yep,
And
that's
go-
fine.
Okay, so the first one said, is identified as Mrs. Jalal shared that she would like a work session for Robert's Rules of Orders. Second item said Mr. Lustig agreed and would like to see a consultant brought in to meet with the board. Keep going, all right. Next one, Mrs. Jalal shared that the board members should be allowed to add items to the agenda. Mr. Pahalka shared that those requests are typically funneled through the board president.
Okay.
Mr. Lustig would like clarification on new business on the agenda.
Okay.
Mrs. Jalal would like to see the addition of the board president for the agenda creation.
Will you repeat that, Joe?
Yes. Mrs. Jalal would like to see the addition of the board president for the agenda creation.
Thank you.
Mrs. Jalal would like to clarify special meetings. Mrs. Jalal would like to clarify public participation. Mrs. Jalal would like clarification on committee meetings. Mrs. Jalal would like clarification on calling in people with special knowledge for committee meetings. Mrs. Jalal would like the role of committee chairperson to be crystal clear. And the last one is Mrs. Jalal would like Mr. Pahalka to present the board with different options for board structures. That's it.
That's all the notes?
Yes, correct.
Anybody have any comments or clarification if you've made those recommendations between December and where we are now, which is a long period of time, so that we can review those things. From a work session or the first two, work session or consultant, I'm not totally sure. You need that in a policy. That may be an administrative focus, and if a majority of the board wants to do that, then you can do that at any particular time. If you put it in a policy, it might not be, you're gonna write it very broad if you wanna do that, and it might not be what you want at that particular point in time. As an example, let's say a school district is looking to build a $75 million building. You may want to have a consultant come in to meet with the board, and that's just what it generally was, about that. It may not be the architect. It may be somebody with, going back to kind of what Maria had said, special knowledge. So some of this you may want to look at, and we can, most all board policies ask the superintendent position to create administrative guidelines for an implementation. So if you want to put it in a policy, you can, but you're going to have to write it broad enough that it's going to fit everything, or if you don't, you now will limit yourself out of doing something. So we could certainly do that. The committee could ask that the administration put something together.
In regards to the Robert's Rules of Order and the consultant possibly being brought in, the reason why I propose that might help our board is many of you know that I've been on the board of a marine conservation organization, and they brought forward a consultant twice. I've been on that board since 2009 and continue to this day. But twice they spent the better part of a day with a consultant, really familiarizing us, the commissioners, with Robert's Rules of Order, and then having practice sessions and that sort of thing. And I was impressed with that. That really helped keep the discussions on track and that sort of thing. And there were things that I learned. For example, Robert's Rules of Order allows for, if there's a motion that has been put on the agenda, or put forward, and that motion has been seconded, there can then be as discussion develops, a substitute motion can be proposed and seconded, and then that becomes the primary consideration. If that goes down to defeat, then it returns back to the previous first motion. You know, I didn't know those sort of things. You know, so I was very grateful to realize those specifications, and it might help our board likewise to have a good sense for that.
Yeah, I think, you know, if you want to do that, that would basically be done and set up administratively, maybe not necessarily. If you have a seasoned board, you might not want to put in here, every 6 months, you got to have a Robert's Rules training. You may want to just say, if it's new boards, that's the type of, and offer it as an option for people to attend. Let me give you another, for instance. Robert's Rules clearly states that a president is the last vote if needed. Well, in the Commonwealth of PA, Robert's Rules is in direct contradiction with the school code. So that part does not apply. So Robert's Rules would be the lead, and because you don't want a new president coming in and saying, hey, I understand I can't vote on any issue. No, the opposite is true. School code tells you you have to vote on every issue unless you meet these criterias and you abstain or whatever it would be. So the Robert's Rules is leading how we run our meetings, which is good and informational, but it would also be good and informational to know and understand. If you do that, Robert's Rules can't violate school code, and it does in some places, and therefore you can't follow that part. That's just a good example of some is going to fit, some is not, but that would be, and my recommendation would be you do that outside of a policy, so to speak. And if somebody requests that, you put something together, and anybody that would want to attend it could do so.
Because that would have been valuable, you know, when we were newly appointed. If we had
Correct.
had
Yeah,
that additional
indeed.
education related to both.
And for anyone who has ever seen Robert's Rules, it's not a 4-page pamphlet that you read and digest and understand. It is ridiculously complicated. And I guess from my viewpoint, I rely on Gareth and/or our superintendent
Right.
to know those rules and keep us in line. And I think following those rules is only as good as the personalities of the members of the board. And I speak for myself as well. I may know it deep down, okay, I shouldn't be saying this or doing this or leading in this way because of Robert's Rules, but, you know, I count on you. I count on the super and the attorney to keep us
Right.
in line. I'm not saying I don't want to look at Robert's Rules, but it's tough.
No, I think that's why I would recommend you don't necessarily put it in policy as a must or a shall. You can create it if the board requests it. It can be something that is done administratively.
Can I jump in here? I think it is in the policy. I think it's one of the first lines in the policy that we should follow Robert's, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. I'm talking about a mandatory training.
Oh, yeah. So that's kind of part of the confusion of where it says in the policy to do something, and then there's a contradiction. Well, no, don't follow that. So then either just take it out, or just to be clear, that what the procedures are.
Well, if you're saying the option is either we follow all of it or none of it, my recommendation to the board would be that's really set up for decorum, and because some of Robert's Rules is opposed to school code, you take an oath to follow the school code, then I recommend that's what you do. And if the board says they don't want that contradiction in the policy, then maybe you take that out.
Can that parliamentary authority be rephrased then to indicate that the board meetings will be conducted according to the school code? rather than Robert's Rules of Order?
That's up to the committee.
I think Mrs. Kraus gives a good point. I would support that. You know, now we've identified two main foundation blocks, and that's a good reminder for us that they exist.
Yeah, in my opinion, I believe that we should be modeling what we would expect in the classrooms, like like the kind of decorum that we would expect our teachers and students in the classroom to uphold. And it should be clear, not that every class, of course, is conducted according to Robert's rules, but, maybe an AP English class would, or, meetings, like student council meetings and things like that. So we should be modeling what the expected behavior is, the expected decorum is, and it should be clear.
I think the wording that you have now just basically identifies that the decorum is going to follow Robert's rules. And it also continues to say that it basically can't violate school law, federal law. I think the wording that you have there now is appropriate if that's what you want to follow.
Because I will also just mention those two, that first part is also linked to school code, which is linked below
Right.
those two sections. So once again, we are following the school code, which then goes with Robert's rules. It's
Right.
encompassing already.
Yep.
Because the 1 and 2 just refers you down to the end of the policy and links right into the school code.
If you want to eliminate the Roberts rules, that's fine, and replace it with some sort of proper protocols. That's okay, but I think what you have in there actually now covers you to say this is what we'll follow unless we violate the law.
And I think here
And
at
it
the
does say
end.
that,
Mhm.
unless it's not consistent with law.
Right.
Correct.
Or
I mean,
state regulations.
the wording, I think, if you want to keep it, is okay and protects you from those things. If you want to eliminate anything, I would simply only, substitute proper protocol with Robert's rules. But it's a common throughout 500 school districts that this is what is there. But obviously, if the committee wants to make that change, I was back on the training part. Okay? There's nothing wrong with having training for boards and a variety of things, including that.
I don't see any reason to change it from the way it is currently written.
I'm just afraid if you take it out, then it's vague.
You say
I feel like
vague?
it's vague. You're
Yeah.
not going to accomplish what I think Maria was trying to accomplish.
Right.
By just saying proper protocol, I don't think that really identifies what is that.
Right, that's very
So I
nebulous.
feel like at least Robert's Rules of Order, I mean, there's something you can look to. So that does define it more, and I think it does address, unless that's not consistent with state regulations. That's just
Yeah.
We can stay focused administratively on the work session with a specialist or whomever on Robert's rules as well, to try to create something outside of the policy. If that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, it looks like the next one is Mrs. Jalal shared that board members should be allowed to add items to the agenda. Oh, no, I'm sorry, Mr. Lustig, did you ask about
Yeah,
new
that-
business? Was that?
No, you're.
That's after
you're
that.
That's
right.
after, you're right.
All right,
You
so.
got it, it's just after.
All right, Mrs. Jalal shared that board members should be allowed to add items to the agenda. Mrs. Jalal, would you like to address that request?
Oh, well, we've had some subsequent conversations. I'm not sure exactly when that would come up about possibly restructuring the committee, how the committee is run. And I think that would solve that, and maybe Dr.
Okay.
Bell can address
Sure.
that.
Not a problem. The board policy that you have now, you have to create 3 committees, which you have. For lack of better terms, I'm not gonna run through all of them. You have the curriculum, you have the finance, and you have policy. Your policy says you gotta have those, and you gotta have a minimum of 3 people on each one of those. It would be something that, again, using some best practices that are around in other school districts, the setting up of those, who's on what policy and generally, or on what committee, is generally done at the reorganization meeting in December. After you select a president, generally what would happen was the president then would go to each one of the board members and say, which one of these committees do you want to serve on? Put that structure together. The board president would then pick a chair of the committee, not that necessarily anything's going to change, but each person could be given the opportunity to serve on 2, not all 3. And the president is an ex officio of each one of those committees. So then you're having a committee, say you have, just for the make-believe world, a committee of 5, and you actually have a chair. That chair is directly responsible to those 4 people in the committee, meaning I'm not the chair, maybe I'm just a member and reviewing, Tricia, I'll use athletics. Okay, I have some things that I want to address or that we would like to have on the agenda from an athletic perspective. You work right through the chair, and the chair helps all the board members of that committee come together. Prior to this meeting, they meet with an administrative representative for that committee, such as curriculum being Joe, finance being Shelley, the superintendent being policy. They meet and discuss what would actually be put on the agenda. The chair of the committee, from the board perspective, may say, I'd like to do this, this, and this. The person that's the administrative lead says, hey, I don't think we're quite ready for that. Can we postpone that a month? That's a very healthy, typical discussion that takes place between those 2 people. And every board member, regardless of if they're the chair of the committee or not, gets an opportunity then to tell their chair what it is they'd like to see on that agenda. Now, again, when you start out, a lot of times people have a list of 3 or 4 things. You may have to phase those in over the first couple months. But that would be the general process that I would look at if I were you as a board in the future during reorganization in December. Between now and then, sorry, Maria, I know you're not here, but we kind of restructured our seating a little bit in the boardroom. And what we would like to do is get the committee, closest to one end of the table so the discussions are more easily to take place. The administration is at the other end of the table, and obviously we still have our audience. But then the healthy discussion continues to take place by that committee. If something's not on the agenda, it can even be discussed at that meeting. Or the chair can say, we have some additional items that are coming up in the next few months, and they're going to get there. So now you've got board members that can individually talk with a board member, not a quorum, individually talk to a board member, get things that they're ready for the agenda. That goes through the administrative representative and then ultimately the superintendent to be put on the actual agenda. And let me give you a for instance. You come to a meeting that you have now through policy, and it's policy 79954. Obviously, it doesn't exist. It's that policy. You as a committee say, hey, we really need a definition or clarification of what this line actually means. Well, probably what I would say then administratively is we're not ready to get there yet. Let's move that to next month. And in that next period of time, the administrative person can work directly with the rest of the administrative team, put that together, send it to the chair and the committee. You don't discuss, you don't deliberate, but you at least now know that information so that when you come to the next meeting, you've got the information you need to have a healthy discussion. or an additional question. Now you're actively involved, every single person, all 9 of you are actively involved in putting something, recommending something for the agenda. Goes through the chair and the administration, then goes through the obviously including the board member, or the board president, and then that's a healthy discussion if everybody has a say.
So I have a question. At what point do all these meetings stay public or
Yeah.
private? I mean, at what point does the finance group, can they meet
If,
as a small group, not an open meeting, I
okay,
guess?
if a quorum of a committee, which is something that I've been reviewing here closely, because we need to define that as well. If a quorum of a committee, not a quorum of the board, a quorum of the committee meets, it must be done within Sunshine or meet the Sunshine Law. That's a public meeting unless it fits any one of those executive session items. So the meetings wouldn't be changing, those items wouldn't be changing. Nothing would change in relationship to that. It's just that you would all have a direct opportunity to have a discussion and have input. Hey, I'd like this item put on the agenda. Great. You may not deliberate. You may not have a discussion. You may not discuss that this is how we're going to plan to put this in place, because that's clearly a violation of the Sunshine Law. What it does is it gives you that opportunity to share early, get it out there, let the administrative team work on it, see if we can get there within that time frame. And the meeting between the chair of the committee and the administrative representative, that's a private meeting. There's nothing that's wrong with that. You're actually looking to develop the agenda that you're going to present to the superintendent that you want to move forward.
Okay.
Did that answer your
That
question?
answer my question?
The other challenge that we need to have, I think, between now and then is slowly make moves to change and fit that process into the future by starting to identify committees. I've talked to Neil specifically about this, and some of you individually about this, putting those committees together based on the people and where they stand now, because there's some discrepancy on what is the total number of the committee, and therefore you can't hold a meeting unless the quorum number is met. So for instance, if it's stated, and I don't have it anywhere that it's stated this way, if it's stated that everyone in the board or on the board is the committee, the policy committee, they're all members of the policy committee, we could hold today's meeting because there's 5 of you. If one of you didn't make it, we couldn't, because there's no quorum. So we've got to clearly define the number in the membership, so that we can clearly define that there's a quorum, so that we can clearly define whether we can have a meeting or not. And that's something that we need to just get refined. These are typical, normal things that happen over time, because it's used to just be, yep, we were here, and then it kind of gradually grew out of that, and some people couldn't attend meetings and some people could. So this is kind of the focus, and I hope I'm hitting everything, Maria, that you're asking for. This is kind of the focus that, as a board, it's something that we're going to try to put in play so that we're prepared, that we all get a say, we all get involved in the committees if we want to. You don't have to serve on any committee. There's no requirement that you have to serve on a committee. And then we can meet the quorum to have the meeting, to make sure we avoid sunshine law problems and all those things in line. We'll just get it a little bit more thematically laid out.
Because I think that would address, most of, I don't want to speak for you, Maria, but I had agreed with some of her concerns that she had brought forward, and I think I had shared with you at one point as well, that, as a committee chairperson, you simply feel as though we get to that meeting and you're simply reading something that was on the agenda with no prior discussion with an administrator who might have been responsible for wanting, that information on there. So I don't feel like you're adding a whole lot of value when it comes to putting an agenda together, even being designated as a committee chairperson. And to be able to know that you would have a voice, that you could add something to the agenda, I think. And again, that was prior to you being here, that we had those issues related to getting something on an agenda. So I think that's where that initially came from.
I agree with
Yeah.
the comments of Mrs. Plank. Something that's been of concern to me, and perhaps my concern is not legitimate. But if there was a controversial issue that the board was trying to struggle through, is there any person who has veto rights? For example, the president of the board. Can that person simply say, we're not going to deal with that right now, and it's done? Or someone with the staff, a superintendent, for example, is there, what is the reality regarding that?
No, any item that's really posted on an agenda, and you have to meet all the regulations of your 24-hour rules and everything like that, or earlier, any item that's posted on the agenda, the board can decide to table.
Yes.
And therefore, that's the process that would take place. In general, there's no, well, you just take it off unless people don't talk about it, or vote in a different direction, or ask for clarification and ask for it to be tabled to a future direction, but there's not really one veto.
There's also I think, if there's a motion made and there's no second, it dies.
That motion would die, that's correct. There's
Right.
different procedural things, and thank you, that's a good reminder. There's different procedural things that then you wouldn't even get to the discussion point.
In the theoretical, if a board chairperson was consulting with the appropriate person from the staff, from the leadership staff, and the two of them could not come to an agreement, if the board chair wanted to put on the table some concern, would the final decision be, yes, you're the board chair, we will consider this at the appropriate time?
Yeah, let me put it in these terms. As a chair of the committee, let's say in this committee right here, as Sue the chair, she meets with me and I say, I don't really think we should be doing that. Okay, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think, she has the right to bring it to the committee.
Correct.
And
Good.
that's where the discussion takes place, with the committee. As the superintendent, I would have the right to say, here's why I think it's a bad idea. But that's your open discussion. That's what takes place.
Correct. Correct.
So I'm not, I hope that answered your question.
That's actually indeed what I was hoping that you would,
Okay. Gotcha.
you would say. That I think that's the proper pathway.
And also from the committee's perspective. Now, it isn't just remember, this is, you, as a board member in the Commonwealth of PA, you're not only responsible to the people who have elected you, you're responsible to each other. And that's part of the focus of this whole direction, that you need to be holding each other accountable in the decisions that you make and what you say, but your final vote, your 9 votes count, okay? So the discussion can easily be healthy. You could be in this policy committee and say policy 79210. You as a committee could say, there's 5 of us on the committee, 3 of us say shouldn't come out of committee at all, and 2 want it out of committee. Well, there's an avenue that those 2 eventually down the road could get it out of committee, but you're going to have the same discussions at a board level. But what should happen is you should all be accountable to one another, and if a majority of the people in a committee say we don't want it to come out to the board yet because of X, Y, and Z, then you as a committee should accept, okay, we got to get X, Y, and Z, then we can get it out.
Good.
So if using your Trish as athletic, and I'm on her committee, and I really want a croquet club. And I would take it to Trish personally first, just one-on-one, or I can take it to the committee and say, this is what I'd really like to see.
The committee.
Okay, to the committee.
Yeah.
And it is voted down.
Mhm.
No one else wants croquet except me. End of story. Is that right?
That is the end of story, and I will lead this into the next question that Lauren had about new business. In the event that happens under new business was created for the opportunity for people to bring something forward. It's not actually a discussion item time. New business is created to present something. You would present, I want croquet club. Can we have a vote as to whether the croquet club item, sorry, that's
Sorry,
terrible, isn't it?
I could have used a different.
Yeah, you could have, thank you.
Brilliant on your part.
Appreciate that. Yes. You could then, under new business, bring that up. You move that item, okay? If you get a second, then do we vote on it? Yep, then you vote. If 5 people say that goes to the committee, or goes to, on the next agenda, then it does. But you don't have technically, new business doesn't have a discussion time. It's not to present something just that I want to say. It's really to present something to be put on the next agenda.
Okay,
That's how it was originally created.
that's very helpful.
Now, a lot of different things have happened with boards over new business. And this kind of leads into your next question, that sometimes people use that as discussion points.
Yeah.
And that's been permitted. You as a board need to decide if you want to continue to permit that. Technically, new business is to be something that is brought up that was not found within the last 24 hours when an agenda was created. So let me give you a for instance. I'm seated on the board. I make a comment that says, week and a half ago, well, I should be stopped and said this doesn't fit that 24-hour rule. This is not under new business. Unless it's something like you're talking about with the croquet club.
Good job.
So ultimately, I'm not sure, I've kind of blended both of those in with putting items on the agenda and a little bit of new business. But you might have more questions under new business.
I do have a response, and it's helpful to have Mrs. Hollowall's example. If that was voted down,
Yes.
following the next general election, if there was a new board that was elected, then Mrs. Hollowall would be allowed or encouraged to bring up that concern again with the new board. Would that be correct?
Well, that is correct, but not only that, she could do it every month
Okay,
for 4 years.
fair enough. Yeah, okay.
So my question, earlier in the meeting, we're asked to approve the agenda.
Correct.
So this item about her club, when that is brought forward, are we going to approve the agenda as it stands? Does she have to speak up then
No.
to say that she wants to add new business, or she can do it at that point in the agenda?
Correct, especially if it's within the last 24 hours. Now, most people that would know that, though, would probably want to bring that to the board's attention. But is it mandatory? No.
Okay.
But you would, most likely. That might fit my terminology of proper protocol. It would be proper protocol. If I know I'm going to say something, I'm going to add it. Does that help?
Yeah, of
Okay.
course.
Okay, the next item, Mrs. Jalal would like to see the addition of the board president for agenda creation. I think a large part of our discussion has centered around that point, included that point.
Yes.
I think maybe she was referring to, in here is that when it defines agenda preparation, it just says it shall be the responsibility of the superintendent. So maybe that's what she was asking.
Most likely.
So maybe
I
we
think
should-
the discussion we just had clarified a lot of it. I think if we were to put the protocols in place, just outlined by Dr. Bell, that would solve a lot of the issues.
Okay. The next item, Mrs. Jalal would like to clarify special meetings. Would you like to elaborate on specific concerns about that, Mrs. Jalal?
Again, I think a lot of this is covered in the current 006 policies. It's just to understand what the role of the committee chairperson is in organizing the agenda or bringing up items. There had been an issue where I asked to put something on the agenda and it was not put on the agenda, and then it was agreed upon by the board president at that time to put it on the agenda, and it never appeared on the agenda. And so I felt very confused. And so that's what that was about. Like, so how do we come to an agreement? And then special meetings, just to find out, like, how do we get together and just how do we get together and talk about issues that are important? That's all. Just wanting to know what the protocol is, what the chain of command, what the protocols. I'm very much about following the rules, but got to know what they are.
Was there something you were looking for in special meetings per se?
This came up. Hopefully we're on the mend now, but it seemed like we were just talking past each other in a lot of ways. And from the administration to the board and board members, with lots of shots across the bow, things like that. And I felt, and I know I'm not the only one, who felt like we really needed to somehow come together and have a constructive dialogue, a structured, constructive dialogue, possibly facilitated by a third party, because there was no one neutral on the board who could do that, or in the administration. So I tried, I attempted to use the policy, the 06 policies, to initiate a special meeting in order for that constructive dialogue to take place. And there was a lot of confusion as to whether I had the right to do that, or does a board member have the right to do that. There's been a lot of questions, and I'm very, very grateful for the public comments, people who have brought up this issue in public comment, because there does seem to be a lot of confusion about the protocols and the chain of command, so to speak. So I'm very grateful, for them to bringing that to light, and I'd be very grateful just to have this a clearer chain of command and protocol, so that we don't have all of it.
I can address that briefly. I think when I look at special meetings, I look at it as a meeting that needs to be called for an immediate item. When I hear you talking about, us working together as a group to work on issues, internal issues, I look at that more as a type of workshop and not a special meeting of the board. Am I right about that, Dr. Bell?
Yeah, and I think what you're looking at, the special meeting in the policy is what's clearly defined within the school code as well as the Sunshine Law on how you call it. That's really what that policy is referring to, and I made some notes about special meetings in, I think it's section 423. And again, it's just for notice, and it's just to make sure that you as a board cannot just meet to have a general discussion and isolate the public. That all has to be done through the Sunshine Law. And that's really what the school code in relationship to special meetings is all about. Who can call them and when. So much of what you'll see in that policy, and in those brackets behind it, you don't want to offend anybody, but in those brackets behind it, that's really the section and reference to the school code. And when you click on that, it'll generally is word for word what you have in your policy, what's in the school code. So from this special, if I'm hearing you correctly, and I don't want to put any words in your mouth, Maria, from what I'm hearing, it was about calling something, but you're more looking for protocols versus a policy of a meeting.
Right.
Okay. Protocols in general, my recommendation is that we develop those administratively and get those to the board for review and input outside of the policy structure.
Yes, and since that time, I feel it's become more clear the difference between a workshop and a special meeting. Now I'm clear about that.
Okay.
But going through that process sort of brought that to light for me.
There's a definite difference, because when you talk about those special meetings, sometimes it's just when you even reschedule a meeting, it's called a special meeting then. And that's all, I mean, we don't get a vote. That's basically what it's called from the code as well as the Sunshine Law.
Would I be correct in stating that usually special meetings are called because there has to be a vote on a pressing issue?
Correct. Or even if, you know, you have snow and you've got to have that meeting and it's 2 days later or within that, or the next day, I would say, then you've got to have, you're having a voting meeting, but it's really a special voting meeting because it's rescheduled.
I believe that there is an existing policy that says if any three board members request a
That's this
meeting,
one, yeah.
that would actually then
That's
be
what's in
honored.
that policy now, that's correct.
If the topic, and I'm speaking only in the theoretical, I don't have something that I'm thinking about, you know, doing this, but in the theoretical, if it was a very controversial issue, would it also be possible for that person to say, I would like to request an executive session meeting? Is that possible?
Yeah,
By board?
anybody could request that as long as it meets the executive session rules and regulations.
Okay.
There's no one on the board, whether they're president, vice president, there's no one in the administration, whether it's, assistant superintendent, superintendent, director. We can't decide what's an executive session material or not. That's already been defined for us, and we have to comply with that. Similar to, if there was a meeting that was called for executive session, let's just say in general personnel, which is usually executive. If during that meeting, it goes to something else that's outside of that, if I would be here, I'm going to tell you, you have to stop.
Even if it's about the croquet club.
Correct. I'm not gonna repeat that, but yes.
That's what I was going for.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, moving on, Mrs. Jalal would like to clarify public participation. Mrs. Jalal?
Yes, I'm very welcoming of the public comment period. I just love that everyone is so involved in our democratic process, and it gives me a lot of enthusiasm and hope for our community. I love that. However, there have been times when the distinction between when to speak hasn't always been clear. And I get the impression sometimes it's more of a cheer, pep rally and not a board meeting. And it can be really disconcerting. It's very hard to concentrate, when the public comment period is over and then we're supposed to be discussing policy and there's a lot of shouting out and rude comments. I think that some of the people out in the audience felt disappointed that they couldn't chime in and raise questions all throughout the meeting. So I just wanted that to be clear for everyone. Like when is the public comment period? What are the expectations during the public comment, especially about cheering and jeering and then just speaking out at random times?
I think protocols for public speaking, number one, from a timing perspective, you have to offer the public speaking before any agenda item is voted upon by the board. They have the opportunity to speak on any item that the board is going to vote on, as well as they are not limited in just general comments. Some boards have created multiple times for public input. Some do it at the beginning of the meeting, and then that time is structured that the only public input during that time can be on an agenda item. And then at the end of the meeting, they can make a general comment or comment about the vote that just took place. They could do that as well. And different districts do it different ways, but the public input guidance is generally read at the board meeting by the board president as what's to be followed in time that's to be in and what's to be followed. If you're looking to want to add something to that, then again, I wouldn't necessarily do it through policy. I would have a discussion maybe in the policy committee about what we read before someone speaks during the public input time.
Or I think maybe to follow up on what she's saying is, I understand that gets read, but what was happening was if that wasn't taking place, it wasn't being addressed during the meeting. It was
Right.
allowed to go off the rails.
Right. That's not necessarily a policy issue. That would be whether, in that particular case, a board president, whoever it may be, has the leniency to make that decision. And that's why when you, as a board, elect a board president, those are the duties you provide for him or her in that seat.
And if I could add also, it seems like there's a perception that the public, people who have spoken during the public comments, they say that they feel disregarded. And that hurts me to the core because I don't think anyone in our community should ever feel disregarded. And we have been instructed as the board not to respond. And I think that's a good idea, like not to respond in a back and forth tit for tat. But it seems like the issues that are brought up never actually get directly responded to. So I can see how they might have this perception. So I don't know exactly when and how to address that, but maybe to come up with a consensus of, how to respond to some of the most salient issues that are brought up during the comment period, I think would go towards, better communication and healing our community.
And Mrs. Jalal, this is Shelley. I believe some of what you just mentioned may also be outlined in policy 903 about public participation. When individuals email me or contact me regarding speaking to the board, my response is always to have them refer to policy 903 prior to the meeting. So I think some of that may be addressed in that 903 that you're asking about as well.
Okay, thanks, Shelley.
Any other comments? Okay, moving on. The next one I think we've covered fairly extensively. Mrs. Jalal would like clarification on committee meetings, at which point Mrs. Hobbs clarified the cost for advertising, which would also be part of the special meeting package. I think when we call special meetings, there's a fee involved in that for advertisement. So was there anything else we needed to add for this, Mrs. Jalal?
No, thank you, Mrs. Kraus.
Okay. Okay, the next one, Mrs. Jalal would like clarification on calling in people with special knowledge for committee meetings. And then also the role of committee chairperson, which I think we've discussed. So back to
Yeah, I think we
special
discussed
knowledge.
that. Yeah.
Okay, anything
Yeah,
more on special experts?
That was just in reference to, I had tried as the curriculum of the chairperson of the curriculum committee, I had tried to get an expert on the agenda and was told that I wasn't allowed. So I just was like confused. Like, okay, why does it say this in the policy, and then when I do it, I get told I'm doing it wrong? So I just wanted clarity on that, and I think if we make a motion to structure our committees the way Dr. Bell has outlined, that will cover the multitude of grievances there.
Okay,
I'm good.
I think we're good. The last one was actually a request from Mr. Pahalka to present different board structure options, but it seems as if a great deal of this meeting has been about reorganizing the committees. So can we move forward with that at this point, rather than having other options presented?
Here.
Well, we've reached the end of the list. Is there anything else that wasn't on the list that any of you would like to add to this discussion?
I mean, I don't know if this is the appropriate time to ask for something to be put on next
Sure.
policy committee meeting. Because we had taken policy 1091 to second read, we had previously discussed that template would be used, or it would be used as a template for policy 109 for the
Okay.
classroom. So I'd like to see us start to work on that if possible.
Okay, so at this point, was that 802, Mr. Alvin? Is that the one it was 802,
That's the organization, yes.
and we would look at 109, start some discussion about that. I don't think we have anything else pending right now. In terms of 109, if we could possibly give some direction to Mr. Alden and his group, exactly what do you want him to look at?
Well, I think one of the questions that had come up, and I think Gareth had actually made the suggestion that once we completed 109.1, we could essentially use that as a template for 109. I think you had even said, can we basically cut and paste?
Okay.
Is that enough?
Yes, yeah.
Director?
Okay. Anything else? Okay.
Yeah, one more
Oh,
thing,
one
just,
more thing.
just so you know, we'll, two people in this room at least, no, three. We will get together and put some administrative guidelines and for different types of procedural notes for you in relationship to this, so that at least you have it to be able to see what the changes would look like, and you have an opportunity to see or add or delete something from it, so that it isn't necessarily disappeared just because you don't make a change in a policy. We want to make sure you have those opportunities to see that. So we will put some of that together over the next couple weeks and get it to you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you for coming in.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Thanks,
Mrs.
Maria.
Kraus, thank you, Dr. Bell. See you, everyone.
Bye, Maria.